All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to break down a single, really foundational prayer from 1969 by Reverend Sun Myung Moon. This one text reveals so much about the core beliefs and the emotional drivers of a global movement, and you know what? It all kicks off with a really surprising picture of God.
You have to start with this line. It is the absolute emotional core of the entire prayer. Right away, it sets up this central idea, a picture of God who isn't some distant, all-powerful being, but is instead a lonely, suffering parent who just wants a real relationship with his children. And really, that's the whole point of this explainer. If you want to grasp the mission, the sacrifice, and the ultimate goal that's laid out in this prayer, you first have to get your head around this idea of a God who is in pain. It is the starting block for absolutely everything that comes next.
So let's jump into our first section. The entire worldview here is built on this one foundation. This premise that God has been working through history all alone and is in a state of deep, deep sadness.
And look, this slide just shows how often that theme gets repeated. These aren't my words. These are pulled straight from the prayer itself. Things like eager and lonely heart, desperately longed, lonely and disheartened. It paints a very specific and honestly a very emotional picture of who God is.
Okay, so the obvious question is, why is God suffering? Well, according to the prayer, the reason is humanity's failure. Let's move on and see how this builds in our second section, the tragedy of lost piety.
To really get this, we have to talk about a crucial term, filial piety. At its core, it's about the love, the respect, and the duty that a child owes a parent. What the prayer does is take this very human, very personal idea and blow it up to a cosmic scale. It's presented as the central duty that we, as humanity, have failed to give to God, our spiritual parent.
This slide just lays out the central conflict perfectly. On the one side, you have what God wants, a relationship built on that filial piety and love, a shared destiny. But on the other side, you have the reality the prayer describes. Humanity is caught up in the origin of sin, connected to the evil world, and trapped by what it calls the decaying bones of evil.
So if that's the problem, what's the solution? The prayer doesn't just leave it as a hopeless situation. No, it lays out a very specific plan. And that brings us to our third point, a special mission for a very specific people.
The text is very clear here. It says that out of all the nations in the world, God has specifically chosen Korea, and out of all the people, a specific leader, the speaker, Reverend Moon, to lead the way and fix this cosmic tragedy.
And the commitment laid out here is, well, it's absolute. This is not a casual promise. The prayer states there's been a clear pledge made, a determination to sacrifice their own lives to finally get this done, to finally achieve God's age-old goal.
But sacrifice is a big word, right? What does that actually mean? What are followers being asked to do? That leads us straight into section 4 and the pledge of the so-called sacrificial lambs.
This metaphor is so important. Followers are not asked to be conquering warriors, but sacrificial offerings. Their whole role is to be pure vessels, like lambs, who can absorb God's honor and glory, and in doing so, take on the heavy burden of restoration themselves.
And the prayer even lays out a clear step-by-step process. Let's walk through it. First, they have to cut off the origin of sin. Then, second, remove all ties to this evil world. Third, they have to actively destroy all elements of evil. And only then, once they're purified, can they take that final fourth step to become those sacrificial offerings.
So all of this, understanding God's pain, the mission, the sacrifice, it's all pointing towards one ultimate goal. And that's our final section, restoring the eternal family.
To really drive home how important this mission is, the prayer looks back at past failures. It talks about people who called themselves sons and daughters but ended up as traitors and losers, people who actually came to resent and curse God. The stakes are just incredibly high, because history, as it's told here, is full of failure.
But right after that really somber note, the tone completely shifts to one of hope. It's a plea for God to embrace this new group of followers, presenting them as the ones who can finally get it right where everyone else has failed, to become the actual root of the true family that God has always wanted.
And this right here is the whole point of the divine plan. It's not about personal salvation in the way you might normally think of it. The ultimate goal is to finally give joy and glory back to God, to fix his sadness, and to release his desperate and lonely heart.
And then right at the very end, the prayer closes with this hugely significant title, The whole thing is offered up in the name of our most beloved true parents, which solidifies this idea of a new spiritual lineage that's meant to finally succeed.
So that brings us to our final thought. Let's just step back for a moment. We've walked through a single prayer, but inside it we found a whole cosmology of suffering, a diagnosis for what's wrong with humanity, and a detailed plan for how to fix it. It leaves us with a pretty powerful question to think about. How much of a movement's entire motivation, its entire inner world, can be found right there in its foundational texts, like this one?